The syringe was centimeters from the IV port, loaded with a dose that would stop a man's heart in seconds. She was just a rookie, 3 weeks into the job, but she grabbed the senior doctor's wrist. That split-second decision didn't just save a life, it unearthed a decades-old crime. The emergency room at St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Chicago possessed a distinct rhythm. To a veteran, it was a synchronized dance of controlled chaos. To Tiffany Anderson, a rookie nurse, exactly 21 days off orientation, it was a terrifying gauntlet where a single misstep meant someone didn't go home. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour when the adrenaline of the night shift usually began to curdle into deep, bone-aching exhaustion. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, relentless hum that seemed to vibrate straight into Tiffany's teeth. She was in the middle of charting a routine laceration when the heavy double doors of Bay 4 crashed open. 68-year-old male, found unresponsive in his home. Blood pressure is tanking, 80/40 and dropping. Heart rate is erratic. Let's move. The lead paramedic shouted, steering the gurney with the kind of forceful urgency that instantly silenced the surrounding bays. Tiffany sprinted to the bedside, her fatigue vanishing beneath a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline. The patient was a frail, older man, with a shock of unkempt white hair and skin, the color of old parchment. He was slick with a cold sweat, his chest heaving irregularly as he gasped for air that his lungs refused to process. Dr. Marcus Aris strode into the bay, snapping a pair of latex gloves onto his hands. Dr. Aris was the golden boy of Street. Jude's a brilliant, fiercely intimidating attending physician, with a reputation for miraculous saves and a temper that could melt steel. He was also the son of Dr. William Aris, the legendary former chief of staff, a lineage that granted him an unspoken, impenetrable shield of authority. "What do we have?" Dr. Aris demanded, his eyes already fixed on the erratic green peaks and valleys of the heart monitor. Unknown history found him clutching his chest. "He's going into VTAC," Dr. Brenda Walsh, the veteran charge nurse, called out as she expertly secured a blood pressure cuff. "Get a crash cart on standby," Aris barked. He leaned over the patient, pressing his stethoscope to the man's chest. His heart is quivering. He's profoundly hypokalemic. His potassium levels must be in the basement. If we don't stabilize the electrical pathways in his heart right now, he's going to code. Tiffany stood by the IV pole, her hands trembling slightly as she prepped the lines. "I have a line established, doctor." "Good," Aris said, his voice clipped and tight. He turned to Tiffany, his eyes burning with sleep-deprived intensity. "Draw up 40 milliequivalents of potassium chloride. Push it IV stat. We need to flood his system before he flatlines." Tiffany froze. The command hung in the air, ringing in her ears like a fire alarm. Push potassium chloride. Every nursing student learns the golden rule of potassium in their very first pharmacology class. You never, under any circumstances, administer potassium chloride via a rapid intravenous push. It is a lethal injection. It causes instant, irreversible cardiac arrest. It must be diluted in a saline bag and infused slowly, over hours, carefully monitored by an infusion pump. "Doctor?" Tiffany managed to say, her voice cracking. "Did you mean hang a bag for a slow drip?" Dr. Aris didn't even look at her. "I said what I said, nurse. He doesn't have hours. He doesn't have minutes. Push 40 MEQ stat. Do it now." The monitor beside them shrieked an angry, high-pitched warning. The patient's heart rate was accelerating into a dangerous, disorganized rhythm. The pressure in the room was suffocating. Brenda was at the foot of the bed, struggling to secure the man's thrashing legs, momentarily distracted by the failing blood pressure readings. Tiffany's hands hovered over the medication cart. Her brain screamed at her to follow orders. He was the attending. He was an Aris. She was a 23-year-old rookie who still got lost trying to find the cafeteria. If she was wrong, a man died, and her career was over before it began. But if she obeyed, she would be the one holding the murder weapon. She grabbed the vial of potassium chloride, drew it into the syringe, and stepped toward the bed. Dr. Aris held the patient's arm down, exposing the IV port. "Give it to me," Aris snapped, reaching for the syringe to do it himself when he saw her hesitation. Tiffany didn't hand it over. Instead, she took a hard step back, clutching the syringe to her chest. "No." The word dropped into the chaotic bay like a stone into a still pond. For a fraction of a second, even the frantic beeping of the monitor seemed to fade. Dr. Aris's head snapped up, His jaw clenched so tightly, the muscles rippled beneath his skin. "Excuse me? I am not pushing undiluted potassium, doctor," Tiffany said, her voice shaking violently, but her feet planted firmly on the linoleum floor. "It will stop his heart. It's a lethal dose." "He is in lethal ventricular tachycardia right now," Aris roared, stepping toward her, using his height and authority to tower over her. "You are actively killing my patient with your insubordination. Give me the damn syringe, Anderson!" "Dr. Aris, stop." It was Brenda. The senior nurse had finally looked up from the monitors, her eyes wide as she processed the argument. She looked at the syringe in Tiffany's hand, then at Dr. Aris. The veteran nurse stepped directly between the furious doctor and the trembling rookie. "Marcus," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerously calm register. "Listen to yourself. You ordered an IV push of potassium. You are sleep-deprived. Step back." Aris blinked. The sheer rage in his eyes fractured, replaced suddenly by a flash of bewildered realization, followed instantly by profound, blood-draining horror. He stared at the IV port, then at the syringe. He had been running on 3 hours of sleep over a 48-hour shift. He had misspoken. He had almost killed a man with a careless, exhausted command. The monitor screamed again. The patient was crashing. "Amiodarone!" Aris shouted, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of his previous arrogance. "Push 150 milligrams of amiodarone and hang a potassium drip, now!" This time, Tiffany moved with lightning speed. She swapped the syringes, flushing the correct antiarrhythmic medication into the line, while Brenda rapidly spiked a bag of diluted potassium to hang on the pole. 30 agonizing seconds passed. The frantic, jagged lines on the monitor began to smooth out, widening into a slower, more deliberate rhythm. The patient's chest stopped its desperate heaving. His breathing grew shallow, but steady. He was stabilized. Dr. Aris stepped back from the bed, his chest rising and falling heavily. He didn't look at Tiffany. He didn't look at Brenda. He simply ripped his gloves off, threw them into the biohazard bin with a violent motion, and walked out of the bay without a single word. Tiffany leaned against the medication cart, her knees buckling slightly as the adrenaline evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow shell of exhaustion. She had just defied the most powerful doctor in the hospital. She had saved a life, but as she watched the heavy doors swing shut behind Dr. Aris, she knew her nightmare was only just beginning. The rest of the shift was a blur of hostile silence. Word of the confrontation in Bay 4 spread through St. Jude's with the speed of a malignant virus. Doctors looked at Tiffany with a mixture of shock and disdain, while the nurses offered her silent, sympathetic nods in the hallways. At 6 a.m., Tiffany sat at the nurses' station, meticulously inputting the night's chaotic events into the digital charting system. Her hands were still slightly unsteady. "You did the right thing, Tiffany," Brenda said quietly, setting a steaming cup of awful break-room coffee next to Tiffany's keyboard. "Don't let him intimidate you. If you hadn't stopped him, we'd be calling the morgue right now, and you'd be facing the nursing board for gross negligence." "Is he going to fire me?" Tiffany asked, her eyes glued to the glowing screen. "He can't. He'd have to explain why," Brenda replied, taking a sip from her own mug. "But Marcus Aris has an ego the size of Chicago. He won't forgive you for embarrassing him, especially since you were right. Watch your back." Tiffany nodded, pulling up the chart for the man from Bay 4. When he was brought in, he had been a John Doe. A police officer had finally searched the man's filthy, water-damaged coat pockets and found an expired, heavily creased state ID card. His name was Arthur Pendleton. Age 68. "I need to finalize Pendleton's admission," Tiffany noted. "The system says he has no digital records here, but there's a flag indicating physical microfiche files down in the basement archives from an admission in 1999. "I'll have records send the box up," Brenda said. "Since Dr. Aris is technically his attending, we need everything pristine for morning rounds." 30 minutes later, a heavy, dust-covered manila folder was dropped onto Tiffany's desk by a bored-looking orderly. The label, typed on a manual typewriter, read, "Pendleton, Arthur, Adm, Zeche, Paisprezeche, o Mia Noa Sute Noa Zech Shinoa." Tiffany opened the folder. The smell of old, decaying paper drifted up. She began to sort through the yellowed sheets, looking for any past cardiac history or medication allergies to add to his current digital profile. As she flipped past a handwritten surgical clearance form, her finger stopped. She frowned, leaning closer to the desk lamp. She pulled up Arthur Pendleton's current lab results on her computer screen, specifically his blood work drawn just 4 hours ago in the ER. Current labs. Today, blood type O negative. She looked down at the physical chart from 1,999. The pre-operative blood typing and cross-match form, signed and stamped, was glaringly clear. Historical labs. 1,999. Blood type AB positive. Tiffany blinked, rubbing her tired eyes. That's biologically impossible, she muttered to herself. Blood types do not change. A person who was AB positive 25 years ago could not be O negative today. One of the tests was wrong, but modern rapid typing machines in the ER rarely made mistakes, and a pre-op typing before major surgery in 1999 would have been double-checked. Curiosity overpowering her exhaustion, Tiffany dug deeper into the physical file. The 1,999 admission notes described a horrific automobile accident. Arthur Pendleton had suffered massive internal trauma and shattered his right femur, requiring extensive orthopedic reconstruction. She pulled up the chest and pelvic x-rays taken of Pendleton just a few hours ago when they were checking for internal bleeding. The digital x-ray of his pelvis and upper leg flashed onto her screen. There, it was a massive titanium rod inserted into the right femur, holding the bone together. The surgery from 1,999 had indeed happened to the man currently sleeping in the ICU. Tiffany squinted at the X-ray image. Modern medical hardware often has microscopic serial numbers etched into the metal for tracking and recall purposes. Using the software's zoom function, she magnified the image of the titanium rod until the faint, ghostly numbers appeared in the stark white contrast of the metal. SN 884 David S. She flipped frantically through the 1,999 physical file, searching for the surgical operative report. She found it buried near the back, a carbon copy sheet detailing the orthopedic hardware used. There was a serial number listed for the femur rod implanted, but the patient name at the top of the surgical log didn't say Arthur Pendleton. It said Richard Holloway. Tiffany's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Why was a surgical log for a man named Richard Holloway in Arthur Pendleton's file? And why did the serial number on Holloway's surgical log perfectly match the metal rod currently sitting inside Arthur Pendleton's leg? She turned the pages back to the primary physician's signature on the 1,999 admission. The scrawling, authoritative signature was perfectly legible. Attending physician, Dr. William Aris, Chief of Staff. Dr. Marcus Aris's father. Tiffany quickly opened a new browser tab on her computer. She typed Richard Holloway, Chicago, 1,999 into the search bar. The hospital internet was fast, instantly pulling up dozens of archived newspaper articles from the Chicago Tribune. The headlines hit her like a physical blow. Key witness in MedCorp fraud trial killed in tragic auto collision. Richard Holloway pronounced dead at St. Jude's. Massive pharmaceutical case collapses. Tiffany read the lead article, her breath catching in her throat. Richard Holloway had been a senior accountant ready to testify against a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate for covering up lethal side effects of a heart medication. The night before his testimony, he was involved in a devastating car crash. He was brought to St. Jude's Medical Center. According to the public record, despite the best efforts of Chief of Staff Dr. William Aris, Richard Holloway died on the operating table. But he didn't die. Tiffany looked at the X-ray on her screen. She looked at the blood type discrepancy. She looked at the yellowed file signed by Dr. William Aris. Arthur Pendleton was a fabricated identity. The man lying upstairs in the ICU, the man whose life Tiffany had just saved by physically stopping Dr. Marcus Aris from injecting him with a lethal dose of potassium, was Richard Holloway. Dr. William Aris had faked a man's death 25 years ago. He had buried the key witness in a billion-dollar fraud case right here in the hospital's archives, granting him a ghost's life under a new name. And now, the ghost had returned to St. Jude's, and the son of the man who buried him had just tried to administer a lethal injection. Tiffany? Tiffany jumped, slamming the manila folder shut. Dr. Marcus Aris was standing on the other side of the nurse's station counter. His scrubs were changed, his face pale, his eyes locked onto the old dusty file under her hands. "What are you looking at, Nurse Anderson?" Dr. Aris asked, his voice deathly quiet. "I asked you a question, Nurse Anderson." Dr. Marcus Aris's voice was devoid of its usual booming authority, replaced by a low, razor-sharp whisper that made the hair on Tiffany's arms stand up. His eyes darted from her face to the yellowed, frayed edges of the 1,999 admission file resting on the counter. Tiffany's mind raced. If Marcus Aris was merely an arrogant doctor who had made a near-fatal error due to sleep deprivation, he was dangerous. But if he knew the truth about his father, Dr. William Aris, and the man lying upstairs in the ICU, he was something far worse. "Just updating the digital archives, Doctor," Tiffany said, forcing her voice to remain steady. She casually slid a blank patient intake form over the open 1,999 file, obscuring Richard Holloway's name and the mismatched blood types. "Records sent up Mr. Pendleton's historical file. I was just trying to find a baseline EKG or any medication allergies to input into the system." Marcus stared at her, his eyes cold and unreadable. He reached across the counter, his fingers brushing against hers as he seized the manila folder. He pulled it out from under the blank form, flipping it shut with a sharp snap. "I am the attending physician for this patient," Marcus said smoothly, tucking the folder tightly under his arm. "I will review his historical data. Your job is to monitor his current vitals, not play detective in the archives. Am I understood?" "Yes, doctor," Tiffany replied, keeping her gaze locked on the computer screen. Marcus lingered for a fraction of a second, as if trying to read her mind, before turning on his heel and marching down the corridor toward his private office. The moment the heavy double doors swung shut behind him, Tiffany let out a shaky breath. Her hands were sweating. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out her smartphone. On the screen was a perfectly clear, high-resolution photograph she had snapped just minutes before Marcus appeared, the surgical log bearing Richard Holloway's name and the titanium rod's serial number. She had the proof. But proof of what? "Brenda," Tiffany whispered, turning to the senior nurse, who was returning from the supply closet with an armful of saline bags. "Can you cover my patients for 10 minutes? I need to check on Pendleton in the ICU." Brenda frowned, reading the urgency in Tiffany's face. "Technically, he's off our floor now, but go. I've got you covered. Be quick." Tiffany bypassed the main elevators, taking the back stairwell to the 4th floor. The intensive care unit was a stark contrast to the chaotic ER. It was silent, sterile, and bathed in dim, soothing light. The rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors formed a steady, mechanical heartbeat for the entire ward. She slipped into room 412. The man known as Arthur Pendleton was lying in the bed, an oxygen cannula looped over his ears, an IV drip of amiodarone quietly stabilizing his heart. His eyes were closed, his skin still terribly pale. Tiffany approached the bed, checking the monitors. His pressure was stabilizing. "He tried to kill me, didn't he?" Tiffany gasped, stepping back. The man's eyes were open. They were bloodshot and weary, but burning with a sharp, lucid intelligence that hadn't been there in the ER. "Mr. Pendleton," Tiffany said softly, glancing nervously at the door, "you need to rest. Your heart." "My name is Richard," the old man rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "Richard Holloway. And that doctor down there, William's son. He didn't make a mistake. He tried to kill me." Tiffany's blood ran cold. You know who he is? You remember what happened in the ER?" "I was fading, but I could hear everything," Richard wheezed, adjusting himself weakly against the pillows. "I heard him order the potassium. He wanted my heart to stop. It's the perfect murder weapon in a hospital. Blame it on the chaos. Blame it on the rookie nurse." "But why?" Tiffany pleaded, stepping closer. "I saw the old file. I know your real name. I know Dr. William Aris faked your death in 1999. I read the articles about the MedCorp fraud trial. But why would his son want you dead now? He wasn't even a doctor back then." Richard let out a bitter, rattling cough. "Because William Aris didn't fake my death out of the goodness of his heart, sweetheart. At first, maybe he did. The MedCorp mercenaries ran my car off the bridge. They were going to finish the job in the ICU. William pronounced me dead, smuggled me out through the morgue, and gave me the Arthur Pendleton identity." He paused, struggling for breath. Tiffany quickly adjusted his oxygen flow, her hands trembling. But William kept the evidence, Richard continued, his eyes darkening. He kept my blood work, the x-rays, the surgical logs. He used my death to blackmail MedCorp. Millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts, ensuring St. Jude's got massive anonymous donations, and the Aris family stayed incredibly wealthy. I had to disappear to a cabin in Wisconsin. I wasn't allowed to exist. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Dr. Marcus Aris hadn't made a sleep-deprived mistake in Bay 4. He had seen the name Arthur Pendleton on the paramedics' intake sheet. He knew exactly who the old man was from his father's blackmail ledgers. If Arthur Pendleton died of a sudden, natural-looking heart attack in the ER, the Aris family's darkest secret died with him, and the blackmail money remained secure. Marcus had ordered the lethal dose of potassium, fully intending for Tiffany to push it, making her the perfect, unwitting executioner. "My chest gave out tonight," Richard whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I couldn't drive. I called 911. The local paramedics didn't know the arrangement. They just brought me to the nearest trauma center. They brought me straight into the lion's den. I have to get the police," Tiffany said, backing away toward the door. "I have pictures of the original file. I can prove who you are." "The local police won't touch the Aris family," Richard warned, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "They own the city's medical board. They own the local precinct. You need the feds. You need the FBI. And you need to hurry. Because Marcus Aris knows I'm awake now. And he won't miss twice." Tiffany sprinted down the fourth-floor corridor, taking cover in an empty dictation room. She locked the door, her hands shaking violently as she dialed information. "FBI Chicago Field Office," the operator answered. "I need the duty agent for white-collar crime and corporate fraud," Tiffany demanded, her voice tight with panic. "Tell them it's regarding the 1,999 MedCorp pharmaceutical trial. Tell them Richard Holloway is alive, and he is about to be murdered at St. Jude's Medical Center." She spent the next 3 agonizing minutes on the phone with Special Agent Sarah Higgins, a veteran investigator who initially sounded skeptical, until Tiffany read off the serial numbers of the titanium rod and explained the mismatched blood types. "Nurse Anderson, do not let anyone near that patient," Agent Higgins ordered, her tone shifting from skeptical to deadly serious. "I am dispatching a federal protection unit right now. We are 10 minutes away. Lock down the room." Tiffany hung up and bolted out of the dictation room. She had to get back to room 412. As she rounded the corner toward the ICU, the overhead PA system crackled to life. "Code Blue, ICU, room 412. Code Blue, ICU, room 412. "No," Tiffany gasped. She ran faster, her running shoes squeaking loudly against the polished linoleum. When she burst through the doors of the ICU, she saw the crash cart already positioned outside Richard's room. Inside, Dr. Marcus Aris was standing over the bed. He had a syringe in his hand. Brenda was on the other side of the bed, physically wrestling with Marcus, trying to push him away from the IV line. "Marcus, stop! His rhythm is stable. You don't need to push that!" Brenda was shouting, her face red with exertion. "Step away, nurse. He is going into cardiac arrest. He needs epinephrine," Marcus roared, using his shoulder to forcefully shove Brenda back against the monitor. Tiffany looked at the monitor. The lines were perfectly steady. Richard wasn't coding. Marcus had manually triggered the code blue alarm to create chaos, giving him an excuse to inject Richard with a fatal dose of whatever was in that syringe, claiming he was trying to save him. "Hey!" Tiffany screamed, launching herself into the room. She didn't think about her job. She didn't think about the hospital hierarchy. She grabbed the heavy metal clipboard hanging from the foot of the bed and swung it hard. It caught Marcus square in the forearm. He cried out in pain, dropping the syringe. It clattered to the floor, the clear liquid pooling on the sterile tiles. "Are you insane?" Marcus screamed, clutching his arm, his eyes wide with a manic, cornered fury. "I am going to have your license revoked. I am going to have you thrown in prison for assault." "The FBI is already on their way, Dr. Aris," Tiffany said, breathing heavily, standing firmly between him and the bed. "I sent them the photos of the 1,999 surgical logs. I told them about the titanium rod. They know about MedCorp. They know about your father's blackmail." The color drained entirely from Marcus's face. the arrogant, untouchable golden boy of St. Jude's vanished, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man. "You don't understand," Marcus stammered, stepping back, looking at the spilled syringe on the floor. "My father, his dementia is getting worse. He started talking about the money." MedCorp sent people around asking questions. If Holloway resurfaced, they would kill us all. MedCorp would kill my whole family to bury this. "So you decided to finish their hit job for them?" Brenda asked, her voice dripping with disgust as she moved to stand beside Tiffany. She hit the cancel button on the code blue alarm, silencing the shrieking siren in the hallway. "It was just supposed to be a mistake in the ER," Marcus whispered, his eyes unfocused, staring at the wall. "A tired doctor, a rookie nurse, an accident. It would have saved everyone." "It wouldn't have saved him," Tiffany said, pointing to Richard, who was watching the scene with wide, fearful eyes. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Two uniformed police officers, followed closely by a woman in a sharp gray suit holding a badge, walked into the ICU. "Dr. Marcus Aris?" Agent Higgins asked, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on the spilled syringe on the floor. "You need to step away from the patient. Now." Marcus didn't fight. The fight had completely abandoned him. He slumped his shoulders and allowed the officers to escort him out of the room. The silence that followed was deafening, save for the steady, reassuring beep 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 of Richard Holloway's heart monitor. Agent Higgins turned to Tiffany, offering a tight, respectful nod. "You have a good eye, Nurse Anderson, and a lot of nerve." "I was just doing my job," Tiffany said, her hands finally stopping their trembling. The fallout was catastrophic, making national headlines within hours. The FBI raided the Aris family estate, uncovering decades of encrypted ledgers detailing the massive blackmail operation against MedCorp. Dr. Marcus Aris was stripped of his medical license and indicted for attempted murder and conspiracy. The pharmaceutical giant faced a renewed, devastating federal probe that shattered their stock prices and sent half their board of directors to federal prison. Richard Holloway, the ghost who had lived in the shadows for 25 years, was finally placed under the protection of the Federal Witness Program. Before he was transferred to a secure government medical facility, he requested to see Tiffany one last time. "You gave me my life back," Richard told her, squeezing her hand from his transport stretcher. "Twice in one night." Tiffany smiled, a genuine, exhausted smile. "Try to stay out of the ER, Mr. Holloway. My heart can't take the stress." A week later, Tiffany Anderson walked through the automatic sliding doors of St. Jude's Medical Center. She was no longer a rookie. She handed her resignation letter directly to the interim chief of staff. She had received a job offer from the top trauma center in Chicago, a hospital that valued nurses who knew when to follow orders and exactly when to break them. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, leaving the buzzing fluorescent lights of the ER behind her, Tiffany breathed deeply. She had stopped a fatal mistake, unearthed a buried secret, and brought down an empire. Not bad for her first 3 weeks on the job. Tiffany's quick thinking not only saved Richard's life, but exposed a massive web of corruption that brought down a pharmaceutical empire and a crooked medical legacy. It just goes to show that speaking up, even when you're the rookie, can change the course of history. If this medical thriller had your heart racing, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable, real-life drama stories.
Hi, my name is Tran Thanh, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, the rookie nurse stopped a fatal mistake in the ER, and then a buried secret surfaced. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was Tiffany's courage. Even though she was new, she trusted her training and spoke up when something didn't feel right. That single decision changed everything and reminded me how important it is to stay focused when the pressure is highest. One lesson I took from this story is that experience matters, but so does having the confidence to question something when lives are at stake. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up felt difficult but necessary? And what part of Tiffany's journey stood out to you the most? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Noble Tales for more.